There was another rogue Supreme Court ruling this week. There's this law in Louisiana that essentially required that abortion doctors have admitting privileges in local hospitals. It's a rule that generally applies to anyone conducting outpatient services like abortion doctors do. But because it's about abortion, the rule of law and the rules evidently don't apply. The law was challenged, the regulations were challenged. The pushback from the abortion industry was, we'll have to shut down clinics, women won't be able to get abortions the way they might otherwise be able to. Ignored, of course, was that the law was designed to actually protect their patients, which again made it curious as a matter of law, and this is what we filed an amicus brief on when it went before the Supreme Court, how it is the abortion industry could go in and defend a right on behalf of a third party with which it had potentially an adversarial relationship. Because it's obviously in the interest, because costs and otherwise, of the abortion industry in terms of not to be regulated, which could be contrary to the interests of their patients who want safer procedures. However ironic to use the word safe is related to abortion. So it went up to the court, and four liberal justices, along with Chief Justice Roberts, overturned the law. What's interesting is they couldn't even defend the underlying abortion law of the Supreme Court, initially defined in Roe versus Wade, and then kind of basically redefined a bit in a subsequent decision called Casey. What's really disappointing and disheartening is to see Chief Justice Roberts bend the law for political purposes here in issuing this decision. So as I said, they're giving the abortion industry a free pass on something logically they shouldn't get a free pass on. I mean, they were allowed to be in court when no one else would have been allowed to be in court, making an argument on behalf of someone they don't represent. I mean, that's kind of like a basic function of our courts, is that they can only consider cases or controversies before them. And no woman was making the argument here. I thought that was where the abortion right attached to a woman seeking an abortion, not to an abortionist. So they upturned the rule of law there to get this result on abortion. They effectively gave the abortion industry a special veto power over any regulation of the industry. And Chief Justice Roberts said, well, he was doing this because he was concerned about this doctrine called stare decisis. Now, that's basically a fancy way of saying precedent. Well, the precedent he was trying to protect in the Supreme Court, and one understands why you don't want judges overturning a decision every time a new issue arises. You want some certainty with it in the law, right? But when a decision is wrong, the law deserves the decision deserves no deference. And it's fundamentally wrong, like the abortion law is that promulgated by the court. Because remember, the reason we have abortion on demand, again, abortion on demand through the entire 9 months of pregnancy, is because of the Supreme Court. You may think states have a right to do that, to regulate that procedure. No, not according to the Supreme Court. That states can begin to recognize the biological reality if there are two lives at issue when you discuss abortion. Not according to the Supreme Court. I mean, practically speaking. So there was a similar type regulation, different case, but similar type regulation that was overturned by the Supreme Court a few years ago that Chief Justice Roberts, dissented on. And just a few years later, he says that case he disagreed with deserves precedential respect. You know, as Chief Justice, excuse me, as Justice, I wish you were Chief Justice, as Justice Thomas writes in his dissent, this is a great quote. I encourage you to read these Supreme Court decisions. I can't get into the detail with you. I'd love to read them for you, but I don't think you want to sit here and listen to me read an entire Supreme Court dissent or decision or concurring opinion, however you want it. But they're accessible to the layman. I'm not a lawyer. I read them. You know, when you read enough of them, you know what parts to skip over. Just go ahead and read them. And I encourage you to read this decision as well, especially Chief Justice's dissent. Justice Thomas's dissent. And he highlights, today a majority of the court perpetuates its ill-founded abortion jurisprudence by enjoining a perfectly legitimate state law and doing so without jurisdiction. Without jurisdiction. I mean, it's one thing, you know, I oppose abortion, both as a matter of law and morally. But what I really get upset about, and this is not about abortion, is the lawlessness associated with the protection of abortion. The rules don't apply. It gets special consideration from the courts that no other constitutional right gets. Without jurisdiction, meaning the people making the case that it be turned aside, this law, had no business being in the court. If that was the case, the court had no business making a decision. So we can talk about the attacks on the rule of law from demonstrators in the street and from politicians, but when you have 5 justices play this game, our courts can undermine the rule of law just as well. And as I said, the one silver lining is that no member of the Supreme Court was willing even to defend the underlying basis of the abortion right. They avoided that altogether because they know it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I want you to remember who's involved in abortions mostly in the United States, Planned Parenthood, and what abortion entails. I talked to you last week about shocking documents we received from the FDA, talking about how they are buying fetal organs, and the demand was fresh, not frozen. We issued previously receipts for the organs of unborn human beings. $600 for a liver there, $600 for a thymus there. We had, and this, let me see if I pulled it up. One of the key groups that exposed this fetal trafficking, this organ trafficking, and in the cases we were uncovering, what would they need the organs for? Humanized mice. So monstrosity on top of monstrosity. And the company providing this, they had a testimony on this, because the Center for Medical Progress, which was highlighted these issues and exposed it, they were targeted for exposing this potentially illegal activity. The law doesn't allow selling these remains for profit. They released new deposition video. I'm going to quote from their release. This is really terrible. So I'm warning you. You may want to just fast forward. The new video includes unsealed deposition testimony from Perrin Larkin, the procurement manager of Advanced Bioscience Resources, which harvests fetal organs and tissues inside Planned Parenthood clinics in Southern California and resells them to taxpayer-sponsored researchers across the country. Those are the sorts of documents that we uncovered, the transactions between the NIH and FDA and these groups. Lawton testified about the fetuses ABR harvests, and this is the quote, sometimes they fall out of the abortion patient when the patient delivers the fetus entirely intact in the operating room once every couple months. Lawton further testified that the fetus is still intact when she receives it in the clinic, laboratory, and nothing is done to the fetus by the abortion provider before providing it intact to Lawton, at which point she testified that ABR will, quote, do a dissection to get the tissues the researchers have requested. I didn't see anything in the Supreme Court decision about that. When asked if the intact fetuses that just fall out in the operating room had had a heartbeat, Lawton testified, it would depend. I can see hearts that are not in an intact POC, product of conception. Excuse me, I can see hearts that are not in an intact POC that are beating independently after removal from the fetus. They're harvesting life, beating hearts. That's how I read it. And then they talk about harvesting non-viable products of conception. What is the definition of non-viable? It means they don't want to save them. They're alive. I know they kept it warm and comfortable. This is one non-viable unborn human being, actually born, for the very brief period it was alive. I don't think there was even time to call 911. This is something that every OBGYN deals with on a rare occasion. It's their medical judgment what to do in that circumstance. So you remember that controversy of what happens to the survivors of abortion, human beings who survive abortion, the targets. They're left to die. They're left to die. So this is the abortion law created by our Supreme Court. It's not moral, it's not constitutional, and it's destroying humanity, our humanity. So we were honored to try to stand for the rule of law in the Supreme Court case. It didn't go our way, but you can bet the March for Life will continue, at least as far as Judicial Watch is concerned. And I know I speak for millions of pro-life Americans in that regard.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.